we basically have published about 3 books so far. One is a screenplay called Roving Romantic, Adventures of the Roving Romantic. Another one is an interview that I did with Allen Ginsberg about 20 years ago, and I recently published it. And then finally, just recently, within the last couple of months, we have Tropic of Poetry, which is a collection by Will Wynn, which I'm very proud to have published. So, but what I'm going to talk about mostly tonight is the Allen Ginsberg interview, which I did when I was a young guy, 22 years old, and it probably was one of the biggest influences on my life, I would say. When I was 22, I was a really headstrong young guy, and when I came across this guy, a poet who I really admired, he took all of my cliches, all of my strong ideas, and just flipped them, turned them upside down. And he wasn't anything like I expected. And it really had a profound effect on me, and I couldn't do anything with it for 20 years. I think everybody in here is familiar with Allen Ginsberg?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The way I met him was extremely easy, believe it or not. He was a teacher over at Brooklyn College, and I just went to the English department one day. I said, "Where's Allen Ginsberg?" And one guy was in there. He says, "He's down the hall, room, blah blah." I just walked in there. I knocked on the door, and he's like, and I hear this voice, this grumpy old voice, "Come in!" And I walked in there, and there he was, sitting at the desk teaching a student. So what I'm going to do is just read the introduction to the book called "How I Scored," the Allen Ginsberg interview. Okay. Ginsberg was a hero to me at the time of this interview, 1995, and still is. I treasured him as a brave communist poet from the McCarthy era. To this day, I adore his poem, America, which is a hilarious and bold attack on the cultural and political hegemony of that time. He is one of the Beat Generation gurus, the Karl Marx character in my favorite book, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Put simply, Ginsberg was a rebel, a lover of poetics, a prophet of self-discovery and freedom. He questioned our very existence. He said to me once, "You're assuming that people are real, that anything exists at all. You couldn't prove that either, kid." I wanted to commune with him intellectually, not sleep in his bed as so many groupies did. It wasn't enough that I read all his poetry or that I performed a portion of Howl in my underwear one night on a poetry reading. I had to talk to him personally, to see his face. Meeting him was simple, really. Somehow I came across a Brooklyn College catalog listed in the back with the names of the professors, and Ginsberg was one of them, a distinguished professor of English. One early morning, I jumped on the 2 train to Flatbush, where the college is located. And when I got there, went to the English department. I asked for Allen Ginsberg. "He's down the hall, room, blah, blah, blah," said somebody. I walked down and knocked at the door, which was propped open by a garbage can. "Come in," a man hollered. It was Ginsberg, sitting at a big wooden desk, one-on-one with a student. He had his big glasses on, which I really didn't like. I preferred the glasses he wore earlier in his life that gave him a more chic look. But that's another story. His pate shined like a light bulb, and he wore a fancy dark suit with a red tie. His mostly gray beard hung scraggly off his face. I remember him being rather gruff, but then suddenly shooting at me this unbelievably warm smile. It is kind of funny now. At one point, he gave me his business card and seemed to suggest we should go on a date. But I was so goofy that I didn't pick up on it until later. He later confessed in Death and Fame that, in addition to being a good poet, he was an extraordinary seducer of young men. I informed him of my rather prude intentions to interview him for my college newspaper, the radical and now defunct College Voice. I gave him a set of questions and copies of the newspaper, which he unceremoniously looked at for a second and then flung to a far table. I told him I was from Staten Island, and he was instantly concerned about me taking a big trip. But I tried to come off like an expert at riding the subways, which made him smile again. And I got the feeling that I reminded him of his youth, when he and his cronies were the lords of the underground, shuttling to and fro from Harlem to Chinatown. "Give me a call," he said. I was ecstatic to be getting the interview. Set up an appointment with my secretary. It was that easy. And since meeting him and interviewing him, I've come to learn that he was a generous man with many people and absolutely giving of his time. "Thank you, Mr. Ginsberg," I said, being formal with one of the most historically informal of men. "I see you have a student with you, so I won't take up more of your time." And I left, the door slamming against the garbage can. I walked down the hall and out into the teeming streets of Flatbush, feeling victorious. It took about a month to set up the phone interview with his secretary, Peter Hale. It was late 1995, during the time of the Beat Generation retrospective at New York's Whitney Museum, and he was very busy. But finally, the date of the interview came. Our talk lasted about 90 minutes and took place at night, a few days before Christmas. Just prior to interviewing with me, he had spoken to BBC Radio. He talked incessantly, and I fought to get a word in edgewise, challenging him at points, which got his ire up. Overall, this is a thoughtful and sensitive interview with a man many consider the top poet of the 20th century.
Right. Yeah.
So, how we